This is Moral of the Story, interested in people telling their favorite short stories and then breaking them down to understand what makes them so good. I'm your host, Max Trapowski. Today's guest is Eddie Alterman, the Chief Brand Officer of Hearst Autos, which publishes Car and Driver, Road and Track, Auto Week, and other auto publications for auto enthusiasts or, let's be honest, fanatics. Eddie was born in Huntington Woods, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit that is by proximity alone deeply connected to cars and the stories that come with them. As a young kid, Eddie gained a love of cars from his father, a die-hard car enthusiast who taught Eddie that a car isn't just a car. It's a story, a collection of memories, like the 1950 Buick that reminds him of that heady time we call adolescence, or the Jaguar E-Type, full of stories about his racing heroes and timeless design. Everyone remembers their first car. Eddie's was a 1988 VW Golf. Mine was a 1992 Toyota Corolla, incidentally. And just like Eddie's dad, we associate each of our cars with the stage in our lives when we owned it. The car is forever intertwined with the memories, the physical with the spiritual. And so perhaps the most powerful car lesson Eddie's father imparted was that at the end of the day, more than anything else, cars are more than a pile of metal and leather. They are the conduits to our memories, and as such, they are deeply a part of our psyche. Eddie would go on to absorb this lesson in a big way. While outside of school, his happy place was behind the wheel, in school, he preferred the old-fashioned way of storytelling, with a pen and paper. And he nurtured his love of both at the University of Michigan, pursuing a BA in English while working his first job at Automobile Magazine, where he began as a motor gopher, responsible for maintaining test cars. Eddie continued to hone his storytelling skills as a copy editor at Automobile Magazine and learned the power of great editing at the New York Times, where he's been a frequent contributor, penning gems with such puntastic titles as When Life Hands You Lemons, Drive Them. His platform grew in 2009 when Eddie was named editor-in-chief at Car and Driver, the world's largest automotive publication. And 10 years later, he was elevated to chief brand officer of parent company Hearst Autos, responsible for the editorial and business strategies of the entire portfolio. But don't think that Eddie grabbed that corner office, donned a blazer, and hung up the keys. Oh no. The self-described car freak spends no less time on the road. For most people, a place to tune out, but for him, a place to tune in, all the way in. His ideal drive, off into the sunset, so to speak, is the coastal beauty of a road trip from LA to Big Sur. Well, technically the sunset would be on your left, but you get the point. And although Eddie may still be adjusting to being an empty nester, perhaps his silver lining is a bit more driveway space for a few more automotive story vehicles. Eddie, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Max. Great intro. I mean, I was tearing up there. That was a great little drive down memory lane. Um, there was one gap that I'd like to exploit here. One career phase you didn't hit on that is core to this story that I'm about to tell.
I love it. Well, hit on that gap if you would, sir.
Okay, so after Automobile Magazine, I left to start a magazine with American Media, which was owned by David Pecker, and you might remember him from the Trump catch and kill stories. So he was the publisher of MPH, which was the sort of lad mag version of a car magazine that we started in 2004, and it had a criminally short life. But the story I'm about to tell might give you some inclination as to why. So, at the time, there was really the internet was very nascent and it was all about car magazines, and we had just felt, a bunch of us who started MPH, guys from Car and Driver, guys from Automobile, we sort of felt like the big major magazines like Car and Driver and Road and Track had gotten very ossified and very stale and very complacent. And so we were the proverbial rocket up their ass. We were like the Maxim of car magazines, a little bit of Spy magazine, if you remember that, a little bit of the irreverence of 1960s Car and Driver, but we were always looking to take the piss, and it was really the two most irresponsible years of my adult life. It was really fun. It was great. It ended in tears, but led to some good things. But car magazines and the challenge that we had set for ourselves at MPH was to do things differently. And we didn't want to have, the 7-car comparison test in Ohio with the boring picture of the 5 sensible sedans. We wanted to mix it up. And to me, great automotive writing is sort of like great sports writing. The same thing happens over and over again. One team wins, one team loses. You drive a car, you tell people how it is. The great writers dramatize it in a way and put the car in a context that really reveals a lot about it. So we were always trying to do outrageous stuff, and we had a Subaru Justy. Do you remember that car? It sort of fell into our possession by extra legal means, and we would take that car and attempt every automotive myth on it. Like, if you put bologna on the paint, does it take it off? If you put sugar in the gas tank, what happens? If you put in a tug of war with a Hummer, what happens? And that was ultimately what led to its demise. But we had done a lot of really stupid things, and I remember when the Hummer H3 came out, we did a story about off-roading in the suburbs that would, we would find off-roading opportunities in suburban areas. And, that meant like, those areas in off-ramps that are all wooded, on the highway, we'd go in there. We had a rock crawling challenge in lumberyard, so that was fun. But it was about putting the car in a hilarious, cool context and doing it in sort of an outrageous and unexpected way. And so the year is late 2004, and two of the most significant cars are about to hit the market. The 2005 Porsche 911, the 997 series, and then the 2005 Corvette, Chevrolet Corvette, which was called the C6 internally. And so these cars have been going up against each other for 40 years. They were kind of the dominant sports cars, and it was rare that their launches or new versions of them happened at the same time. So we had to come up with an idea that really totally knocked it out of the park. And we were kind of scratching our heads, what do we do with these things that hasn't been done before? And then I remember my friend Al. Okay. Al, and I'm not going to say his last name, but Al was a hilarious guy, huge brain, very, very, he's a player, and, lived a lifestyle of leisure, a privileged guy, and he lived in New York City. And he once told me, because we were talking about driving in New York and how difficult it is and how stressful it is. He goes, no. New York's the best city to drive in. You just have to know where to do it and when to do it. And then he proceeded to tell me about how he had just crashed his father's SL driving it through Central Park at 3 a.m. And he was hauling ass around, that ring road around Central Park,
Yep.
and all those kind of interstitial roads under the bridges. Well,
Yeah.
He had lost control of the SL and smacked it into a bridge abutment. And his dad's reaction to him taking the car out at 3 a.m. and driving it around Central Park was, no, Al. That's what the M6 is for, not the SL. He was mad that he had chosen the wrong car. So Al's a hilarious, great guy and lived life to the fullest, sucked the marrow of life. And I thought, well, this is our venue. Well, this is going to be where we take these two cars and drive them. And there was no thought of permits, no thought of, well, maybe this isn't a good idea. Maybe we should check with the magazine's legal department. None of that. We just called up our friends in the PR departments of Chevrolet and Porsche, pitched the idea to them, and they're like, when do you need the car there? and they loved the idea. So we actually kind of, set it up and thought, well, this is going to happen. And Dan Pund, who worked with me at Car and Driver and now works at Road and Track, great guy. We went to New York, flew to New York, picked up the cars in the Manhattan garage, and just sort of sat and waited until the city died down. It was, I think, a Wednesday night. We had gotten sort of a last meal at, what's that great old Chinatown restaurant? I can't remember the name of it. It was just on Billions. And we were just sort of like waiting until we could strike, until our moment was right. Okay. And we were staying up. And we had a photographer with us, and he was napping in preparation for the shoot. And so it's about 2:30, and we say, okay, yeah, let's find our spot. And we drive the two cars to the gate or the inroad to the park. I think it's 72nd, and it would be 5th on the east side. Okay, and we're sort of setting up this shot of the two cars. We wanted the shot to tell the story, the opening shot of the thing, of the story to sort of relay what was going on here. So we set the two cars up, kind of pointed at each other, right in front of these two NYPD blue sawhorses, that were marking off the entrance to the park. Like, don't come in here, the park is closed, right? So we're setting up the shot. We've got the shot done. We're lighting it. We're trying to be as discreet as possible, and we're trying to not attract any attention. And it's 2:30 in the morning. We figure, okay, this is fine. This is like, we're gonna pull this off. And as we're done with the shot and we're getting ready to drive through the park, I start pulling one of the sawhorses back, and I hear whoop whoop whoop, and I'm like, oh shit. So we spent all this money to get here. We promised the PR guys at the companies that we were going to do the story, and now it's collapsing like in milliseconds, right? And I'm like, oh shit. Just act naturally, Dan. Just be cool. Like, just stay in your car. Don't get out. And I walk up to the cops, and the guy jumps out of the car with like incredible ferocity. I'm like, I'm going to fucking jail. And he runs over to me. He goes, "Is that the new fucking vet?" And I was like, why, yes, sir. Why, yes, officer. This is. Would you like to see it? And he's like, oh, my God, this is beautiful. And I'm like, would you like to get in? He's like, oh, this is the greatest. I'm going to order one of these. And he's like, he is so taken with the car and what's happening in that moment that he doesn't realize, or he turns a blind eye, I should say, to what we're actually doing. And he is asking us questions about the car. We're becoming friends. We're telling him what's going on. We're telling him what we're doing, who we are, and where we're from. He doesn't ask for permits. He doesn't ask for anything. He's just like, enjoy your evening, gentlemen. And then we were done. And we got the story done. And I think there are some morals here. But I just, I wanted to share that because it's one of my favorite stories. And it's, at the very least, it proves that if you have a bad idea, sometimes you should go for it. But that's not the real moral.
Well, I have countless questions, but before we get into those, we just went on a Disney cruise a few months ago, and there was a guy wearing a shirt on the boat that I was like, I must acquire this shirt no matter where I'm going to get it, no matter how I can get it. His shirt was, "That's a terrible idea. When and where?"
Like, that's what this was, right?
I mean, literally, that's how so many great stories start. Okay,
we
first
were too
question.
stupid to know that we couldn't do it,
Yeah, I mean, so did you end up actually driving them through the park?
Did the whole thing, and Al was right. It was an incredible drive. And we turned it into a big 10-page print story that was called Midnight Run. And we documented the whole thing. Probably another dumb idea.
Yeah. So that's also one of my questions. Who Did the people that gave you the green light at Chevy and Porsche keep their jobs? Because I don't see how they green light something like this without even asking a single question.
Oh my God. Well, these were different times, but they got in so much trouble and we felt so bad. And my buddy Joe over at GM's like, you've gotten me almost fired like 4 times. And I was like, yeah, but like, look at all the stories we did together. They were all great. And this one was like, it turned out to be a feather in his cap.
Oh my God. This is a capstone. That kind of story is the capstone.
Totally.
So how much trouble did you get into when the story went live?
They were concerned with other things. I think we flew so under the radar with that magazine that, they didn't even notice it. I don't think anybody read it. It was great. It was glorious. We were in our own little bubble of delusion.
I mean, that is literally the definition of glorious. Explain this to me. How did you think that you were not going to get caught? Like, what was the rationale in your minds around that?
I mean, I think I was nervous, and I thought maybe there's some plan B where we drive it someplace else or we do something else, but it wouldn't have been as good of a story. I was sort of stupidly overconfident in those days and just was such an ardent believer in what we were doing. You know how sometimes you create your own sort of reality and your own truth because you believe so deeply in what you're doing that,
Yes.
People can tell you that's not a good idea and you don't believe them. And that's sort of where I was. That's what my headspace was at that time.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think that a lot of the greatest accomplishments in history across industries happened because the people perpetrating those crimes, so to speak, were just young and dumb, and they just didn't know any better. Like, being naive in those circumstances is actually a strength, because if you talk to those people and you say to them, if you could do it again, would you? They would say, oh, hell no. Not knowing what I know now, that shit was crazy.
Right. It was a moment. The barometric pressure was correct. Your LDL cholesterol was low. There were 1,000 things that fed into it. The moment being just right, and that was one of them.
How fast did you go through the park?
You know what? We got up to a pretty sickening speed. That's a great road, and it is the best place to drive in Manhattan. And I don't know what we were doing on the speedometer, but it was dark. It was late at night. We were driving through horse shit, and at the same with the photographer's head out of the sunroof. But at the same time, it was just like, can you imagine that, the freedom of it? When you're in your like early 30s and you've got 2 sports cars that haven't come out yet, the most hotly anticipated sports cars in the world, and they weren't at dealers yet, and we had them, and we're driving around Central Park, for our job.
Critical distinction. You were getting paid to do this.
Yes, exactly. I shudder at the thought of it.
So you're talking about the road that's inside the park that the horses go on, the horse carriages, and people run and ride their bikes down that road.
And taxis, bikes are there. There are taxis on that road. There's stoplights on that road, which we obeyed, by the way. We weren't going to break that law.
Let's just make a very critical distinction.
But no, it was really fun, and we saw, we went around the reservoir. It wasn't very well lit, but it was drivable, and it was great. And we didn't crash. We didn't, smash a thing into a bridge abutment like Al did.
Well, that's because you didn't get out the M6. That could have arguably been worse.
We had the right cars for it, is the point. We didn't have some doddering SL, like some old man's SL.
So in Chicago, there's a highway known as the Kennedy, which runs from O'Hare to the Loop. And there are these express lanes that change directions that run between the regular eastbound and westbound lanes. And there's construction, but back when the lanes would actually sort of switch between inbound and outbound, I feel like there was almost an art form around timing your entrance to those lanes to avoid all the traffic in the main lanes. And I went down so many rabbit holes Googling if there's a schedule for these lanes to open up or not, because I really wanted to get in those lanes, not just because I hate traffic, but also because how cool would it be to be in those lanes when everyone around you is stopped? And needless to say, none of that information is publicly available. If it were, then those scheduled open times or switch times would be complete parking lots. And it got so bad with people cutting into the express lane entrance right before the entrance that they started to post state troopers there, because people would get out of their cars and get into fights because, the left lane of the inbound, of inbound Kennedy gets backed up for a mile beforehand, right?
Yeah.
So I used to drive a G35 coupe. It was a 6-speed. I
V6, great car. Infiniti G35 S. Yeah. Was it an S?
It was just I don't think there was an S designation at the time.
Yeah.
It was just, I know what you're talking about, the next generation of the car when it got a lot curvier.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. So this was the G35. This was 2005. And I love that car. And you're right. It was a nice little 6-cylinder engine. It was, it had just enough kind of get up and go to, for you to have some fun. And we lived in the city at the time. And so I didn't, have a lot of chances to actually experience the wonderful acceleration that all of that torque, and I say that with sarcasm, that all of that torque, the engine, the torque that it provided. One time I was coming into the city, and the way that the express lanes work is there's a sign that shows that the express lanes are open or closed. And then there are these multiple sort of arms and obstacles that they just sort of remove, these little gates that automatically get moved as the lanes are opening. And traffic was terrible coming into the city. And as I was coming in, right as I was going past the closed entrance, I saw the gates start to open. So I swerved into the entrance, just barely missing those big yellow tanks filled with sand. Yeah. And I took off. And I got up to, it had to be over 100 in those express lanes, because I knew for a fact, there was nobody in front of me.
Right.
Like it was completely open. And there is a part where once they straighten out, they sort of stay straight for a couple of miles. And that's where I gunned it. And I looked to my right. I just glanced to my right briefly. It was a parking lot. I looked to my left, and it was a parking lot. And I opened all the windows and the sunroof, and I turned up the music. And I was like, this may never happen again. And because of that, I'm going to push the envelope a little bit. It's one of my favorite driving memories, because that's one of those things that, like, to your point, the barometer was right. The LDL was just right. And I was like, this is incredible. I'll never forget it. And I haven't.
Those moments of just pure freedom where you're in command. There's no autonomous anything. There's no lane keeping. There's no, advanced driver safety. It's just you in the car, driving it to its peak as fast as situations will allow, as fast as circumstances will allow. Mm-hmm. There's something just beautiful and free about that. And everybody should experience that once in their life.
Once in their life. Yeah.
At least once, if not every week or every day.
Well, most people don't get paid to do crazy shit like that.
Right. I've calmed down quite a bit. This was at a different company. As I said, 2 most irresponsible years of my life. MPH, we had, we had a mascot. We had a pet monkey that was at the next, that lived at the next door office, but would come over occasionally. And it was an Animal House atmosphere. And we may have gotten away from ourselves.
Like an actual pet monkey?
Yeah, there was a pet monkey who was very, very cute. And he was on the masthead of the magazine. I don't remember his name. All monkeys are named Bubbles, right?
I feel like that's about right. Or George. I feel like
George, right?
George.
Something like that. Dan will remember. But I have this great picture of, or Dan actually has it. Dan Pund has this great picture of he and I that night sitting on the hood of the 911, smoking.
Amazing.
And the youthful joy permeates. It was fun.
Man. Yeah, it's the freedom, even when you don't realize it, the freedom of your youth is something that is so precious and so fleeting. And it's something that's really hard to recreate when you're older because you have responsibilities, but also because you're kind of more jaded and it's really hard to sort of let go, right? And when you're young and you can, mash the pedal, so to speak, without really thinking through all the ramifications, there's something so intoxicating about that. And
yeah, when you're older, you know all the consequences. You know how bad it can go. You think in 3 dimensions. When
Totally.
you're younger, you're like, oh, man, this is the best. I'm just going to pursue the feeling. I'm just going after the feeling.
Totally. That's exactly right. I mean, to your point, there is something so magical about being out there with a car and all of a sudden just seeing the road open up. Like, you ever been in the left lane and all the people in front of you just merge to the middle lane and you're like,
That's the best.
thank you, God.
Or you find yourself on a twisty, 2-lane mountain road and there's nobody there and the road is perfect and the day is clear. And I just live for those moments.
Yeah.
The right car, the right road. Phenomenal.
The right car, the right road. Oh my God. Yeah. So as you think about that crazy ass story that you told, what are some of the morals that come to mind?
Okay. The first one is that there is a difference between the illegal and the immoral. And what we were doing was illegal. I mean, we had a cop sanctioning it. So maybe that was a permit in and of itself. A cop told us to, resolve the evening for its best tidings.
Is that how you rationalize what just happened? Because I feel like that wasn't an actual sanction. That was just him being happy that you let him sit in an unreleased car and then looking the other way.
He was being super cool. And yes, we were
It's amazing.
committing, an illegal act. I checked the statute of limitations on something like that, and we're well clear of it, so we're fine. But it was not an immoral act. It was 2 professionals engaged in the faithful service of their job, trying to get a great story for the readers, okay? And I think there is a morality in that. There's a morality in pushing the bounds of legality for something that is ethical and pure and true. And that's what we were doing. And that's my rationalization.
Your justification is market leading. Also, I don't disagree.
Okay. So, right? So, there's a difference between what the laws are and what, human morality is and human ethics are. And we were sacrificing our licenses, our reputations, our jobs for the reader. And I think that's the noblest pursuit in journalism. Disagree if you will, but that was that's one takeaway. That's one moral of the story. The other is cars bring people together.
Mm-hmm.
I was an adversary to the cop. The cop was an adversary to me. We were positioned against each other in this game. But the Corvette broke that down. The Corvette allowed us to share an experience. It was the first Corvette this guy had ever seen, first new one he'd ever seen, and he got to sit in it.
Yeah.
And he got to ask questions about it from people who knew what it was about. And the fact that we had those cars there that nobody had ever seen, I think gave us a sort of credibility with him.
Mm-hmm.
these guys must be okay if they've got access to this stuff, right? They can't be complete, you know, miscreants. They can't be total criminals. They have to. They have to be. Has to be something to recommend them. The fact that they got access to this, so that access gave us a lot of pull. But the car did all the work. You know, the car broke down this guy's defenses, and you know, I think if somebody had a Honda Accord trying to do the same thing, he would have spent the night in jail. But the Corvette saved us. The 911 saved us. And, you know, it was only through the kind of the fullness of time that I realized what a powerful moment that was, and just how important the bonds are between car people.
Oh, totally. As a plus, this was before the era of body cams. So he had plausible deniability.
Exactly. It was for somebody else to find us and haul us in.
Yeah, he'd be like, you know,
I didn't see those guys.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, that's that smell of new Chevrolet Corvette leather on my clothes. I don't know, man.
No, exactly.
Coincidence. What was your take on the two cars? Which one were you a bigger fan of?
Well, it was, you know, sort of a great era for both of those cars. The 2005 911 was the second water-cooled generation of that car. And the first water-cooled generation, the so-called 996, was a really, really good car, and it was better than the one that preceded it in a lot of ways. But it sort of didn't feel like a 911. It was bigger inside. It didn't, you know, it felt like sort of a new car, and because the 911 had the same doors and same greenhouse since its inception up until 2000, when that 996 came out. So that 996 felt, you know, like a substantially different proposition, right? But when the 997 came out in 2005, it was like they had stuffed some more 911 back into it, and they had made it feel and sound more like an older 911, yet it was a newer car. And I felt like they had made a nice sort of correction to the 996. Now, you drive a 996 now and they're great. You drive a 997 now and it's even better. But there was a lot of backlash against the 996 as not a true 911, more of a GT. And the 997 addressed that. I think in a really, really positive way. So I love that car. The C6 Corvette was incredible too, and it was really the second generation of a big reinvention on that car as well. But it was small, it was tidy, it was very sort of European handling. You know, prior to the C5, Corvettes were sort of lightly engineered, big motors, sort of, you know, spat out of the factory. The C6 felt, you know, crafted. It felt like it was really highly engineered, and it was great. And that became the basis for some really excellent, you know, high performance variants like the Z06. So those cars were pretty evenly matched in a lot of ways, and they delivered a ton of satisfaction for the enthusiast. But they were fundamentally different too. Like the Corvette, front engine, V8, the 911, rear engine, flat six, and you know, so they were kind of as different as could be in terms of layout, but evenly matched in terms of the kind of joy they delivered. And I loved them both. I thought that the 911 was, you know, fractionally better, sharper handling. I like the sounds. I like the fact that the engine was hung out of over the back axle. I love the you know, the fact that they had tried to make that water-cooled 6 sound air-cooled, you know, so you could drive it without the, you know, on sound and know where to shift on sound. Those cars are like, you don't need to put the radio on. You just listen to them. And so, you know, I'm kind of a 911 guy as opposed to a Corvette guy, but that Corvette was sweet. And I could see the, you know, the love in the in the cop's eyes.
Well, and the Corvette is phenomenal value when compared to the Porsche.
Oh, totally. Totally. It was like, I don't know, as equipped, it was, maybe 3/8 of the price. No, 5/8 of the price.
Yeah.
And it's just always been such an incredible value. But by the time the Corvette got to the C5 and the C6, it was a really, really great vehicle in its own right. And I liked both of them. It's hard to say, I still remember how they feel. The 911, because it was steel, not fiberglass, and I think there were maybe some SMC, like sheet molded compound panels on that car, if I'm remembering correctly. But the 911 felt a little stouter. It felt more like this is an Autobahn cruiser. This thing can sit happily at 180 degrees all day, 180 mph all day. Whereas the C6 was like, maybe some parts are going to fall off. But for our purposes, they, in that sort of relatively low speed environment on that course, they were both great. They turn differently, they steer differently, but at the end of the day, you get that beautiful singing V8 up front in the Corvette versus that churning, whirring flat six in the 911, and two really, really great, ribs versus fillet.
Totally. That's actually a great analogy. So, when I turned 40, my wife got me one of those, tickets to go race a few exotics around the track. And I think I was telling you this. It might have been like a Murcielago, and then a 488 GTB, and then a GT3 RS. And the GT3 RS, there was only one or two of them. And so everybody raced everything else. And then there was this massive line for this Porsche. And they started going down the line and offering people 2 rides in one of the other cars, instead of the one ride they had remaining in this Porsche. And the vast majority of people declined that because everybody, right, they wanted to drive it. And so the Porsche was my last one that I drove around the track. And so by then I started to get a little bit more familiar with it. It's the Milwaukee Mile Raceway, but you kind of go through the middle of it. So there's some twists and turns there. And I got a little bit more comfortable with the raceway, with the track. And so when I finally got into the Porsche and I took it out, I felt like I wasn't even close to reaching its capabilities. Like, this thing would hold on to the corners probably, not substantially more than, the Lambo or the Ferrari, but it just felt like it was so solidly attached to the track that I could do no wrong. It's incredible.
They are amazing. And having, the majority of the weight over the driven wheels.
Yeah, of course.
Rear wheels, that really helps the physics of the whole thing. But 911s have always been cars that you can drive to the track, drive for a day on the track,
correct,
then replace the brakes and tires and drive home.
Correct.
And maybe you don't even need to replace the brakes. The brakes are so good. But there always has been this really, really strong linkage between the track and the street for 911s, and it's a legacy of their sports car racing heritage. And when you get into a machine like the GT3 RS, it's beyond the racing version in some ways. This new GT3 RS that they've got has in-car adjustability for the dampers that the race car doesn't have. Like, the technology is almost a step above the race car, and they're incredible machines, and very much race honed. And there's a degree of sensitivity to me. Like, sports cars are all about sensitivity and how they make you feel and the feedback they give you. And the Porsche gives you a degree of feedback that you really don't get anywhere else. Not even a Ferrari, not even a Lamborghini. Certainly not a Lamborghini. Lamborghinis are great for driving into walls and stuff, but the Porsche is really like a scalpel, and the body control is so phenomenal. The transitional behavior is so good, and that's honed, for on a lot of race weekends. They're really, really great vehicles.
And I think that that extends maybe not as much, but certainly to an extent to all German cars, or at least let's just take like Audi and BMW. Like the one, so I used to only have Japanese cars, and then I ended up getting a Q7, and then I ended up getting an SQ7. And like, to your point, the way that V8 sings, I literally went down a rabbit hole trying to figure out how to turn off the valves, because when you turn on the car, the valves are open and then they close. And so the best I could find was you literally have to get a computer, a mini, like a piece of hardware that plugs in to some. I don't know if it's like the OBD. Yeah, maybe it's that, and it allows you to control those valves. And there's something so crazy about having a car that has a third row that has like a 3.4 second 0 to 60.
I know, it's a vehicle you can really drive hard, right?
I mean,
it shrinks down.
Totally. We went to Wisconsin with the family, and we were close to Road America, that track.
Great course.
And
great rhythm to that course.
Totally. And I was like, I would love to drive my car around this course. And I told them what kind of car I have, and they were like, oh, it's an SUV? They were like, does it have a third row? I was like, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's for, infants, basically, is the size of that third row. They're like, I'm sorry, it's we can't allow it because that is a third row. I'm like, it's got a twin turbo V8 that is legendary and puts out over 500 pound-feet of torque. They're like, yeah, sorry, there's a third row. It's like, really? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. I mean, cars are products of their environments, right? And
totally.
The Autobahn system is a high-speed environment, and the Alps are a high-speed environment. We do not have a mountain range running through our country laterally the way Europe does, right? So the cars they're set up a little bit differently. And, yes, of course we have the Appalachians and the Rockies, but that doesn't dominate the country the way that the Alps dominate Europe. And so the cars, they're built for cruising here and for long straight highways. And it's rare that you get a sports car like the Corvette that truly is capable of supercar feats and has such incredible handling and such incredible control. It's just sort of a different environment. And so, like, our 3-row SUVs are not SQ7s. They're not built for the Alps.
Do you has your opinion of the Corvette's capabilities changed since the most recent model, the mid-engine one?
No, I mean, I've only kind of grown in my respect for what they've done. The current Corvette, which switched from front engine to mid-engine, and they call that the C8, that is a legitimate supercar, and it's everyday drivable. This is the feat that they've achieved. Like, they've really created sort of an American version of the McLaren 720S that is comfortable every day, but really, really hot-headed when you hammer on it. And they've only done, like the Z06, and then and the E-Ray even, and the coming ZR1 are only going to get more extreme. But the base car, it's an everyday supercar, and that's what it should be. It's not trying to give you the kind of, the 30-mile-an-hour thrill that like a Ferrari will give you, and it doesn't have the same sort of sing-songy, flat-plane crank engine in the base car. But the Z06 is very much a Ferrari fighter. Very, very strong, incredible track car, and it's amazing what General Motors has done with that thing, and turned it into a legitimate world power on the supercar stage. And it's just come a long, long way.
For sure it has. Yeah, I mean, that when I saw that in the Z8, you can every time you know how you can lower and raise the car because it's so low to the ground that if you go over a speed bump, you'll raise it, and then it tracks using like GPS coordinates the spot where you raised it, and then it'll automatically raise it next time.
It's so incredibly sophisticated in 1,000 different ways.
Totally.
And that small block V8 in the base car is still going strong since 1955, but they put a totally different engine, an incredible, you know, dual overhead cam engine in the Z06 that just screams, and it's a flat plane crank like the European cars, and it just sounds amazing. And the Z06 is another level of Corvette that we've really never seen.
Yeah, totally. I have to be honest. I was nervous when we started this episode that we would spend no time at all on this story and instead go off on various tangents about cars, and it has fully lived up to that so far. So let's talk about the story for a minute. Okay. So there's this other side to you that is as talented as the side that can discuss the intricacies of the various generations of Corvettes. And that's the side that is a storyteller, a writer. So what you've written some really captivating and engaging stories in your day. So what in your mind do really good stories have in common?
They involve the reader. They put the reader in the action. And that's what we always tried to do at Automobile, at MPH, at Car and Drivers. Put their butts in the seat, bring the car to life in a cool way. Don't ignore the sounds, the smells, the stuff you're driving by. Don't ignore the errant thoughts that creep into your mind while you're driving, because that's almost the best time to think about stuff, is when you're driving and your mind is, your non-conscious mind is sort of just driving the car, and your higher brain is free to think about weird shit. We put that all in. Put in your crazy cockamamie theories. Humanize this thing and talk about the benefit to the driver, not just the features. Create a story, pull people in. Car journalism, as practiced by the greats like my former boss and mentor David E. Davis Jr. and Brock Yates and John Phillips, who I think is maybe the best to ever do it. These are new journalism values. Like, before Tom Wolfe, there was David E. Davis Jr. doing the thing, living the thing. Before George Plimpton wrote Paper Lion, there was David E. Davis driving the car and telling you a story. And that, to me, is still my North Star. And it's about connecting with people and making something that is rare and special and only you get to do, universalizing it, making it something that other people can share in. Because, look, cars have two seats for a reason. You want to share that experience with somebody. And that's what we're so privileged to do as automotive writers, is bring those stories back. It's not just a car, it's an experience. And as you said, you're so bonded to your cars, Max. They're the places where you do your living. And we get to bring those to people. And that's a privilege, and we got to take it seriously. And so that's always been what's guided me. I always thought of cars as great human stories, great conduits for travel, great, David E., my mentor, used to say, we take interesting cars to interesting places and talk to interesting people when we get there. And that's pretty much as good as it gets in terms of an ethos.
Totally. That's pristine. I will say not all cars have two seats. There is a certain McLaren that has one seat that's in the center, and that is an experience you're destined to have by yourself.
Well, that one has two. The Speedtail you're talking about?
I don't remember
F1.
Which one.
That's actually a three.
I think the F1.
The F1, you're in the center position, but there are two outboard seats. But there's a great line, my friend Johnny Lieberman, I'm sure you've heard of him, if you're into cars, because he's a big personality. He was talking about that single-seat Ferrari that just came out, and he said, you know why it's got one seat, don't you? I said, no. He goes, because if you're rich enough to afford this thing, you have no friends. But they're to
Oh
be
my God.
shared. They're to be shared.
Yeah,
And
of
enjoyed.
course. Always. So you gave me a couple of morals for your story that you've told. But do you think that every story has to have a moral? And if it doesn't, is it still a story worth telling?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Morals, no morals. Stories are the things that allow us to make sense of the world. And that's how our brains are organized, narrative. And stories are everywhere, and they're great.
Totally. It's funny how that's how we used to pass knowledge on from generation to generation, and sort of the fallacy of storytelling, which is memories aren't perfect and stories evolve over time. I feel like it is almost becoming its strength, because since the stories evolve over time, they can morph and become even more engaging, if
And
maybe
more
less
true,
truthful.
in a way, right? More true. Like the details become more false, but the point of it becomes stronger and more true in the telling.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you just focus on the sort of takeaway, and if you have to embellish it a little bit to really make it hit that much harder.
Exactly.
Totally.
It's the value.
I mean, maybe over time, when you keep telling that story that you told, there could be more than one cop. Maybe at some point it'll evolve into a chase
Yeah,
down
that's
that
the
ring
best
road.
of my recollection, what I told. I don't know if it's 100% true. Dan will fact check me on it, but that's how I remember it. That's how I like to remember it. And that's what makes me feel good when I tell it.
Yeah,
But we got away with murder.
you kind of did. Now, you talked about what makes for a good story. What makes for a good storyteller?
I think it is an eye for detail, even if the details are wrong. I think it's, a great storyteller has an innate charisma, and it extends to more than just storytelling. And, an idea for structure and how to keep people engaged, and choice of words. All these, this is the great thing about stories, is that the great ones have so many elements, and pacing and twists and turns. And the great storytellers, I will guarantee you, they're good at other things, not just good at storytelling. They're great at life usually. And I was listening to the Broken Record podcast with Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell when they were interviewing Robbie Robertson, the late Robbie Robertson of the band. And he is such a powerful, incredible storyteller, and his nuance and his details and his word choice are just so great. You're like, this is just a special human being. Like, he's good at everything he does, and I think that comes out when you hear a great story. There's usually a really fascinating person behind it.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of great storytellers, Malcolm Gladwell being an obvious one. So is Rick Rubin.
Incredible.
His stories, and he would be the kind of interview subject that wouldn't let you get away with shit. Like Mark Maron interviewed Rick Rubin on his podcast, and Rick Rubin just had his way with him, because Maron would try to say something that was maybe a little bit of a stretch, or trying to identify with Rubin. Rubin's like, no, like that's not actually correct. And I was like, damn.
Yeah. And Malcolm is very agreeable, but Rick is not. Rick is, these are my thoughts and taste and ideas, and that's all I've got. Whereas, Malcolm is a true journalist whose ideas change when new facts come in. And Rick is not that way. But
No,
I don't
correct.
know Rick personally. I just know how lateral of a thinker Malcolm is, and how exceptional his brain is.
Yeah.
He's one of a kind.
It's rare. So tell me this. What is one of your favorite books that just nails the art of storytelling?
Gatsby. Gatsby is the to me the ultimate 20th century novel. Everything is in there, all the longing, and it's only like 10,000 words long. It's like a novella or a long magazine piece, but it's got so much in there. And I just, I read it for the first time when I was probably 12. I read it occasionally. I just think it's so economical and so beautifully told, and there are a lot of people who go, "Oh, that book's shitty." I just don't see it. I think it's incredible, and I love it, and I love it maybe irrationally. Like I'm a sucker for Stanley Kubrick movies, but those aren't exactly, feats of economic storytelling. But you like what you like. You know what I mean?
Yes. The Great Gatsby, which is 10,000 words divided into 20 sentences.
Right. That's right. But I mean, it's the whole human condition as we experience it today, to me. And that's what's so remarkable about it. I thought, I don't have any obscure title to land you, no management book. I think Gatsby contains multitudes.
Yeah, and what's crazy is how much it stands the test of time.
Yeah. A jazz age novel, but it's really kind of timeless.
Totally, because the human condition, right? I mean, the world can change, but that doesn't change the things that we struggle with and think about.
Exactly.
Man, this was so much fun.
Great talking to you, Max. Thank you for indulging me.
You too, man. Eddie Alterman, car fiend and wizard of penmanship. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, my friend.
For show notes and more, head over to mosspod.org. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast on. This was Moral of the Story. I'm Max Czapowski. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.